Welcome to Doctors at Work. My name's Matt Daniel, and this podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. Today I'm having a discussion with Professor Dame Helen Stokes-Lampard, who has had a wide range of very senior leadership roles countrywide. And in this episode, she tells me how to get into leadership, how to progress, and the skills needed to succeed. Now, many people will have really great skills, but they don't put themselves forward. They wait to be asked, or they wait for the perfect opportunity. But that means that they struggle to have the impact that they want. And Helen's tip is to go for it, learn and develop, and don't be afraid to fail. She tells me it's important to keep eyes open for exciting opportunities, and that also means having to create space for those things by letting go of other things. Our careers are not linear, they evolve all the time, and every step opens up a myriad of other doors and opportunities. Getting to know yourself is important for good leadership, as is getting to know the people around you and picking the battles that you choose to fight. And I love her mantra of don't just moan, do something. Welcome, Helen. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here. Well, where to begin? I guess the first thing to know is that I'm a GP. I'm a frontline NHS general practitioner. I'm a partner in a surgery in Lichfield in Staffordshire. But I guess how I've got here, and I've picked up a lot of other things along the way. So I'm from Welsh. Like you can hear from my accent, I'm from South Wales, born and brought up in a former mining village, went to a big, fairly tough comprehensive school. And really only realised that I probably had the ability to become a doctor when I'd done my O-levels. I was the last era of O-levels in the UK, which dates me and ages me perfectly, should you be so inclined to find out. Up until then, I knew it was something around healthcare I wanted to do, but I hadn't thought I was bright enough to do medicine. Anyway, I went to a sixth form college, decided I wanted to get out of Wales. This was the mid-1980s, and it was a time of great opportunity and excitement. You could feel the energy in the country. Things were coming out of a very dark place and time. And so I found myself in St George's Medical School in London, where I was an undergraduate and had a really awesome time. And I realized I come from a family where one of our sort of family mantras is don't just moan, do something. So if you're not happy about something, don't just whinge and moan, but actually get on and do something about it, which has sort of always meant a degree of activism or practical application of your energy. So I got involved in the Students' Union, which as an undergraduate is an awesome thing to do because you get to do sort of medical politics as well as quality and standards, as well as the sort of social and membership type things that students' unions give you. And I ended up taking a sabbatical to become Student Union President in St George's in 1994, which was a big move. And it opened all sorts of doors for me because that was the time when medical education was being reviewed massively. So I got involved in rewriting the medical curriculum at St George's at that time. Throughout medical school, I knew that I loved almost every clinical discipline. I knew I wanted to be with patients. I wasn't going to be more lab and science focused. I was patient focused. But beyond that, I enjoyed just about every clinical discipline I ever did. And I intended going into gynae oncology. I'd got into medical school thinking that was my area of interest, partly because the experiences I'd had as a teenager. And nothing dissuaded me from that. And so that was the career path I went down. And due to life events and getting married, I ended up back in South Wales as a junior doctor. And that's where I started my ONG career. Did that for several years. And then more life events happened. And I'm happy to pick up on any of these if of interest. But ended up having a career change and a rethink about what I was going to do next. And I think the way I framed it in my head was, well, if I'm not going to fix them one by one, I'm going to fix the whole flipping lot of them in one go. And I decided to move into public health medicine. And my husband and I were relocating to the Midlands, and I sort of knocked on the door of the public health people in the Midlands and said, "Hi, how do I get a training number here?" And there was the kind of, right, they looked at my CV and they went, "Awesome, this is all fantastic, but you do need some experience in general practice. So get yourself 6 months, even 3 months would do experience in general practice, and then we can guarantee you a training number." Things were slightly different back in the day, but and so I went to the West Midlands Deanery as it was then and said, "Hi, how can I get some experience in general practice?" And they went, "Oh, sorry, computer says no. You've just missed the training round for a year. Go off and find something to do for a year and then come back." And I was like, "Oh, that's really sad. You sure there's nothing?" And then the little chap said, "Actually, what about a bit of research? We've got these really interesting academic GP roles. They're quite new. Um, if you could get us your CV by 5 o'clock today, you could be considered eligible. Now, I was working at that time, so I was a senior SHO. That was a thing back in the day. In a hospital, I was in the hospital making the phone call. We didn't even have mobiles back then. This was in one of the secretary's offices making the call. It was a mid-morning. I remember it so clearly. I said, yeah, get me a CV and a covering note by 5 o'clock, and we'll consider you for this because that's the deadline. And I said, what would they involve? He said, a bit of research, bit of teaching, probably a master's in research methods. I was thinking, oh, that sounds quite cool, actually. And we said, we'd put you in a really good practice in Birmingham. Um, and so I took the fax number, got off the phone and went to the medical secretary, how the heck do I do this? She said, well, HR will have your CV, won't they? So I ran down to the HR department in the hospital, said, begged and pleaded, would they pull my file and lend me my CV in hard copy, and then photocopied it, handwrote a note, faxed it off, and then I ended up getting an academic GP training post in Birmingham, and I never looked back. I never considered moving to public health medicine because I found my happy place. This incredible mix of being able to do some research, being able to teach. So we were immediately into teaching undergrads. I might even have taught you, Matt. And then, but also at learning about sort of leadership in a educational and higher education context was fantastic. Plus, to training 50% in general practice, and suddenly that continuity of care that you could give in general practice, understanding the whole dynamics of the person in their society and where they live, the community context, the social context, the familial context, as well as their own individual medical and psychological needs, was just an eye-opener. And I came home, as it were. So romping on, I stayed with my academic career throughout. And in fact, I've never left Birmingham as an academic institution. There have been plenty of opportunities, but for lots of reasons, I stayed put. And I'm now a professor of general practice education. I went down the research route originally. I ended up I discovered that I was okay at research. I got my PhD, I did tick those boxes. But actually what I was good at is getting stuff done and organizing things. And so I ended up leading the clinical trial, the Birmingham Primary Care Trials Unit, an NIHR accredited unit for a few years. But then as other parts of my career were taking off, I had to move away from research and I moved across to education, which I loved just as much. But you could do education part-time, whereas you couldn't do a serious research career part-time. And I ended up heading up community-based medicine in Birmingham for several years, running a master's program and so on. But in parallel, that passion for fixing stuff and not just whinging, do something, that had motivated me as an undergrad came back. And I'd suppressed it for a while because I got some advice to really nail down and get my CCT out of the way, get my PhD out of the way. But then I got involved in sort of medical politics, but from a Royal College's perspective. So I got involved with the Royal College of GPs. And that took off. I never expected it to at all. I always saw myself as a backroom fixer kind of person. And I became treasurer of the Royal College of GPs in about 2011. But in a few years, people were starting to tap me on the shoulder saying you should think about going for the chair. So the chair of RCGP is the equivalent to presidents in other colleges. They just have a slightly different nomenclature. And so in 2016, I was elected as chair of the Royal College of GPs, and everything pivoted from then. Subsequent to that, I was chair of the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. I've just come out the other end of that. And along the way, I've picked up a host of advisory roles. I'm now a non-exec director on the board of NHS England. I sit on the government's National AI Security Task Force. I've got involved in genomics. But my real passion for holistic care means that I helped set up the National Academy for Social Prescribing, which is a standalone charity which I chair. I'm a trustee in Macmillan Cancer. I'm a busy lady, Matt, but I love it.
Yeah, you've done masses and masses of stuff, and I'm really interested in. I mean, maybe let's kind of think of somebody who's early on in their career. Sort of there's foundation doctors or students that are listening, and they'll be thinking, "Oh, wow, how on earth does somebody have such an amazing career and do all of these things?" So how does a very, very early career doctor get started in medical leadership?
Look, I can't speak for everyone, but I know that for me, I'm we're all high achievers in medicine. We don't get to be doctors without working hard and being reasonably bright and so on. But I'm also quite a planner, and I like to know exactly what I'm doing, A, B, C, D. And actually, the difference I had to make to do any of this other stuff is I had to give myself space to say yes to interesting things.
Okay.
That's what, so for me, it was about saying, well, actually, if I want to, if there's all this cool stuff I want to do and achieve, then I've got to make space for it. And we're all incredibly busy. None of us feel like we've got space in our lives, but to do interesting things, you have to make space. And what happens is when you take interesting things on, you find the space for them, you make the space. So give yourself permission to try things. Give yourself permission to make a space for things, but also giving yourself permission. And I was very lucky. I came from a family where I was given permission to try things and not succeed. Because if you only try things you think you'll be brilliant at, you're going to miss out on a whole heap of stuff that you might be good at. You'll just never know.
Yeah.
So permission to fail, I guess, is the dramatic way of putting it. And what it means is, so I've done stuff and I romped through things and I've done things for X amount of time and then I've moved on. Some of them I moved on from because not well, fail is too dramatic a word, but I realized that others could do it better than I could, or it's fine and I've learned stuff, but that's probably as much as is right for me or for others. So I guess being prepared that you can you can move on from things. It doesn't have to, everything doesn't have to be for life. And I came into medicine and certainly into general practice expecting to be a GP for life. Yeah. And actually I'm 22 years on. I'm still a GP partner. That's the one thing I've stayed doing from the day I got my CCT in general practice in August 22, I walked straight into being a part-time partner and I've remained a part-time partner. But that's been the only constant. Everything else has evolved and moved and ebbed and flowed. Now, I've stayed employed at the University of Birmingham throughout all this time, but I've had myriad different roles. I've been off on secondments and sabbaticals.
Mm-hmm.
So I think awareness that the future doesn't have to be set in stone. Going down one path does not mean it's the only path. I think medicine, we're very linear when we think of careers, and certainly training routes seem very linear, but you can step out of it. I mean, obviously there's the step on and off pathway, which are quite a formalized way of doing it now, but don't be afraid. You're never wasting time when you try something different.
Mm-hmm.
Should never look back at things and think, oh, that was a waste because in that year I didn't do anything. You learn something different.
There's so many really good tips, and if I maybe just go through them one by one. So the first thing you said, making space for interesting things, because there'll be lots of people listening, or maybe if I think of my conversations, I'm too busy. This is a really great opportunity, but I'm too busy, and I don't know whether sort of people talk themselves out of it. And so I'm wondering, did you proactively, did you sort of say, okay, I'm going to keep some space behind so that when something interesting comes along, I'm going to do it? Or did you sort of say, well, something interesting comes along and you kind of say, okay, something else has got to go, and then, you go for what you want, and then you fix the rest of the stuff afterwards?
I don't think I've knowingly ever had a gap in my life, Matt. So
Okay.
I didn't keep space just in case.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably over time I got a realization that as these opportunities came, so it's the hairs on the back of my arm test for me. If something is really exciting, I'm thinking, oh wow, that's a really good, interesting thing to do. Okay, so if it's giving me the tingle, giving me the hairs up on the hair, how do I make space for it? So it's then looking at the rest of my portfolio. What can I flex?
Yeah.
But also you then have to get to the point where you give things up. And we're not good at giving things up as a general, as a species, as a tribe, doctors, we're not great at giving things up. Because we've taught to be winners and to be successful. And so it's reframing giving something up as moving on, as wrapping it up, not giving it up.
Yeah.
And passing it on to somebody else. I mean, one thing I've really made a point of is if I do need to move on for something, actively working to find a successor.
Yeah.
And whether that's always thinking, what succession, who's coming up the ladder behind me, how can I help them up? It's also when the time comes, if something happens unexpectedly. I mean, the recent one for me was the AI task force thing. I literally had a phone call from number 10 Downing Street and, can you help with this big, crazy, mad, unpaid thing? And it fitted all my tingle test. I had no space in my life at all for it. It was breaking all my own rules of taking on any more unpaid work. But it was so interesting. And so therefore it's right, I'm going to have to stop something else. I'm going to help you find somebody to do what I was doing.
Yeah.
But that's also something about valuing your own time and your sanity and your life outside of medicine as well. I'm not very good at it. I'm sure you have much better people to talk about that than I am. But at least knowing your boundaries and how far you'll go. Sorry, I've digressed again, Matt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, and you said there's this permission to fail because lots of people be thinking, I'm going to go for this role if I know that I'm perfect, if I tick all the boxes, I have all the qualifications, and I can guarantee that I will be a success. I think lots of us kind of talk like that, but you're given a totally different perspective of going for stuff. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I had some really great academic supervisors and people, amazing mentors and people I've worked with over the years. And I remember chatting to one non-clinical female academic who said to me, "Stop being such a girl about things, Helen. What would one of the what did she use the phrase? I mean, what would one of the testosterone brigade do in this situation?" And what she meant, it wasn't necessarily about being male and female. It was about a different mindset. It was being about a more commercial mindset, being a more assertive mindset. And I was in a situation where I was frustrated. I wanted to be promoted. There was an opportunity for promotion, but it was pretty clear that the university didn't want me to do that particular job. And she recommended a book, and it's a trashy book in some ways. It's called, they're very dated now, but at the time I found it super helpful. It was American. It was called Why Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And so written, Louis Frankel is the author, written, it's an American lady, but it was talking very much in a business context by women who sometimes often don't put themselves forward and not prepared to go for something till they're ultra perfect. And I said, I think the gendered part of it nowadays is largely unhelpful, but the traits, if you recognize the traits in yourself, and I mean, there's other stuff we'll come on to in a bit about I've always stuck very much with a code about I will always play nicely. I will not compromise my values and my integrity. But actually, being prepared to go for something where you don't tick every box on the person's spec or the essential experience, or you might be a slightly left field candidate, can lead you to some really interesting, exciting things. And in that particular situation, her prod of me gave me the confidence to go for it. And actually, I did apply for the job. I spoke to the head of department who was clear with me he didn't want me to do the job. And I explained to him why I was doing it. I was doing it so that people would know I wanted to be promoted.
Mhm.
I was getting exasperated that I wasn't being promoted when others were. But I said to him, I will go for it. And you will have to or the university will have to shortlist me because I fit enough the criteria and I'm an internal candidate. But then I will pull out. I won't go through the charade of you having to interview me and me being interviewed, knowing that you're not going to give me the job.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did. And it was a really, I said probably at the time, it was the bravest thing I'd ever done.
Yeah.
And I got promoted within 4 months of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a really interesting thing. It felt like a reckless thing to do, but I just felt I was being overlooked and I was getting resentful of that. And I mean, I don't know how applicable that is to other people, but sometimes you do need to stick your head above the parapet to people to know you're there, but it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, slightly different point,
Yeah.
Matt, but I said it was scary to do, but he respected me for it because I did it very nicely. I didn't humiliate anyone. But I told him I was not going to do what he wanted me to do, but I was going to respect his view by not putting us through a further charade.
I hope you're enjoying the show. Please click subscribe so you'll be notified when new episodes become available. This podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. You can be part of that mission too by forwarding this show to one person who you think might benefit from listening. Thank you. Now on with the show. Now, this strikes me as super important because there's so many people that I talk to, people that are brilliant, but nobody knows who they are.
Yeah.
They never apply. They say it's not for me, such and
Or they're
such.
waiting to be asked. They're
Yeah.
waiting to be spotted.
Yeah.
And in busy departments, it's easy. And particularly if you are a nice person, you're a person of integrity, you don't push yourself forward because culturally that's not what we do in the UK. Other nations and other cultures are actually much better at us, but we can find it uncomfortable when we see people putting themselves forward.
Yeah.
But there are ways to do it. And yeah.
Yeah, so people kind of sit back, and as you say, they nobody knows how brilliant they are, and it's they don't achieve, they don't climb through the ranks for whatever reason, and actually, that's bad for all of us as a profession because there's a stack of really good people out there.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
okay, this sort of the idea that you might do something and then you might fail, and and that's okay. Yeah, can you tell me about it? It's perfect. Do it. If it turns out you're not good at it, well, that's all right. You learn and then you move on. Tell me a bit more about that.
But this is almost the antithesis of what we do in medicine. You can't risk failure in medicine because lives are at stake and the health implications. So it is quite a different way of thinking from our professional and clinical interactions. But in terms of other roles, managing, leading, sorting, actually you don't know if you're any good at something unless you try. And many of us in medicine are polymaths. Yeah, we have skills in all sorts of areas. I mean, some of the best musicians and artists I know are fellow clinicians. I'm not, by the way, I'm not one of those things. But so why shouldn't we be good at management or leadership or all the other things? But until you've tried it, you don't know. I always knew that I could get stuff done. So I knew that I was a complete finisher because I would finish things and other people just would never get round to the last bits of it. I knew that I was I guess, an activist in the sense that if something bothered me, I would do something about it.
Yeah.
But I was trying, I mean, research management was a classic one. I mean, I had no idea if I'd be any good at that or not. But that was one where it was a bit of, I guess, a bit of talent spotting in the department. I think probably they were scrabbling around for who the heck could do this, because most of the researchers didn't want to do research management. They wanted to do research. And I'd shown myself to have aptitude for getting stuff done and sorted. If a party needed organising, I'd sort it. If a rota needed doing, I'd get it done. Um, but what was one of the big things there was that I had a head of department who basically said he'd have my back.
Mhm.
And it was a kind of, so there's something here about people believing in you.
Mhm.
So this is not about cozying up to people, far from it, but this is if you know that you have a good constructive relationship with a senior colleague, and having them as your safety blanket if you try some stuff
Mhm.
is so helpful, because in the vast majority of the time, bright, intelligent people who have a go at stuff will make it work, and they'll only ask for help when they really need it, or they. And so the investment, if you're in a position to support others, then the investment of saying, "I've got your back, I believe in you," or sometimes just tapping somebody on the shoulder and going, "Have you thought about this? I'm sure you could do this." A lot of people just need a little gentle shove to
Mhm.
have a go, and knowing that they're supported and held in that process is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm also interested that quite early on you've identified that you're really good at getting stuff done, and and it strikes me that you've probably gone from one role to another and you got stuff done, but it's probably a superpower that you have. But I'm wondering, okay, so but we'll all have a superpower, won't we? In your case, it's getting stuff done. Somebody else will have a different superpower. And how did you use that knowledge of what you're really good at? How did that help you achieve to where you are today?
So I think this goes back in phase. First of all, how do you know what you're good at? How
Yeah,
do you know when it's a superpower versus a learned skill?
yeah,
How do you know what's innate and what's learned? And if you are okay at something, how can you get better at it? And I think there is a really important thing in knowing oneself. I
mhm,
think universities and medical schools are very good at filling us full of knowledge and training us to be doctors. They're good at helping us be medical citizens, a part of the medical community. They're not always great at helping us know ourselves. We should, by the time we're qualified and working as doctors, know how we learn best. We should know how to manage our own stress and some of our personal resilience, and we should have some leadership skills. But that still isn't the core of what makes me, me, and you, you.
mhm,
So there are various things that happen. So I remember doing just a few basic personality testing stuff. Really, when I was quite junior, I was doing GP training. We did some personality stuff. And I'm thinking that was inherently incredibly interesting. Then an opportunity came up to do a leadership and management training program. It was a reasonably low scale one. It was a regional thing. And it was great because it was actually for anyone in the primary healthcare team. So it was GPs. I think it was about 60% of the people who took up the post were GPs, but they were also practice managers, they were pharmacists, I think there was a dentist, but it was a really good multicultural, multidisciplinary group. And so we learned from each other, but we had a bit of formal teaching about what is management, what is leadership, and learning about ourselves and personality testing. And I found that really powerful because suddenly appreciating I am a strong Myers-Briggs extrovert and I am married to a strong Myers-Briggs introvert.
yeah,
But we share all the other personality traits. We are beautifully matched. And so our yin and yang is on our energy, his introversion to my extroversion. And he needs his cave and time to recover after social interactions. And I need more social interactions to thrive and be energized. Then later on, understanding my personal energy and how that impacts on other people. So realizing my natural energy levels are really quite high, but that can be exhausting for lots of people. So I consciously dial down my energy levels. In most situations in meetings, I've learned I have to dial it down and keep it very controlled. And I've just learned gradually to adapt my style over the years. The innate Helen, the inside me, is bubbly and frothy. But actually, to be really effective, I'm much more effective dialed down. Then over time, I've had the opportunity to do some really good intensive leadership courses. And you don't need to go out and spend a fortune on things. There are things around, but each one will give you something different. I've had the privilege to have mentors and coaches at different times, and they've each got their place. But I've never stuck with one thing all the way. You don't need the same thing for life.
Yeah.
And the last thing I learned about myself that's been super helpful is how I bounce back from disappointment and failure, what my natural resilience is, if you like, my elasticity. And what I know about myself is that I'm an incredibly empathetic, emotionally intelligent person. So I tune into people, and which helps with my communication skills. Which means that normally that would make it very hard for me to be a tough grown-up leader, because you've got to do difficult things. And if you feel too much for people when you're doing really difficult things, that makes it hard. But I bounce back. I'm lucky I've got natural resilience. I take it hard. I feel it hard, but I get over it. I bounce back. And knowing that about myself, that was different from the majority of people, was really helpful. So I was told that about myself. Most of the other things I worked out through life. So the lesson for me is learning about yourself, because all the skills you learn about yourself, you can then apply to the teams that you work with and the others, your colleagues. So what is it about them? So they're really bad at bouncing back, or actually they've got this incredible creative brain, but they're terrible with following rules or sticking. So they'll always turn up late, but they might create something awesome. This one I should never bounce in with an idea and just talk to this one off the cuff. I have to put it in an email. It makes you be a better leader, and it makes you communicate much more effectively as a team. Sorry, I've gone off slightly, Matt, but
I mean, this is super important, isn't it? Because there's two things here. Number one, you need to know yourself, and number two, you need to know the people. So it's all about people, isn't it? But
it's all
starting with
knowledge is easy. Google will give us knowledge. It's all about the people. That's where the complexity and the challenge is, and the fun.
Yeah, and for if I think for people that are early on in their career, there's something there about really spending time and paying attention. Maybe sort of something there about reflexivity of noticing how am I doing? How am I affected? How is this landing? Because so many people, they just go on autopilot through life. I think they don't notice what's happening.
I call it aiming, not driving.
Okay.
Do you know people who drive? You see people out in the car, and some of them just aim their cars, and other people take a pride in driving. They want to be better at what they do. They want to be with one with the machine, and others they just they aim their car. Meh. And actually, it's the same with yourself. You can drive, not aim your life if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you've continuously reinvented yourself. You talked about there's different learning opportunities. You're learning about yourself, so you go from one course to another, from one mentor, etc. You get different things from different people, and there's different careers. And how do you manage to sort of to always reinvent yourself time and time and time again?
It's funny, I've never thought about it as reinvention. I've thought it more evolution. So
Okay.
one thing's just led on to the other. But I'm very happy, but that's a really interesting reflection.
Yeah.
I think there's something about, I'm not a badge collector. I haven't done courses to get
Yeah.
qualifications or tick boxes. I've done it just because I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So for me, I've got to be interested in something. I do love to learn.
Yeah.
So, if we've got a builder in the house, I'll be asking what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I can wax lyrical about damp courses and about grades of gravel because of this trivia that I've picked up along the way. Actually, gravel is not trivia, it's quite important. But I am genuinely curious about people and places. So I learn. I think I've ended up, what's happened over time is I've realized that my real passion is for truly holistic care. So, and just recognizing that people, of course, patients have their medical problems. Of course, they have their psychological problems, but they have their social and their spiritual challenges too. And unless we fully embrace all of it, we're only providing partial care. And to be a good generalist, a good GP, but also if medicine got the totality of the individual and not just the parts, we would far better serve our patients. And this is a bringing together of Eastern and Western approaches to medicine. We're terrified of talking about spirituality because it makes us think about religion, and we're all unsure about how to do that. When you think about things in a more spiritual sense, about what gives us satisfaction, what gives us reason for living, then you put onto that the social factors. We all know about the social demographic impacts on people. I mean, that's massive and far more important than what we do as medics. Then suddenly it all just fits together a bit better. And so all the interests I've picked up have been because of that real passion for getting health to be more focused around the patient than the patient to fit in with the vagaries of a healthcare system. And it's bizarrely ended taking me down some, I don't know, not rabbit holes at all, but slightly different things. Like I've got the ultimate personalization of care is our genome, right? So, our ultimate personalization is what makes us at the building blocks of life. So on the one hand, I'm interested in social prescribing and how we look after the social elements of people's lives that the health and care system doesn't. But on the other hand, I'm fascinated about the benefits, but the limitations of the genomics, and whether that's polygenic risk scores, whether that's multi-cancer detection tests, whether that's newborn genome screening, because it all comes back to this whole approach to care. Mm-hmm. So perhaps recognizing what matters to you as a clinician. So what is it about me as a doctor that I'm happy to ripple out and give me a more rewarding and fulfilling career? So, and for some people, it'll be because they've got a real passion for one thing. So it could be, some people develop a passion for a subset of what they do, which takes them, so, whether that's the criminal justice system, whether that's legal medicine. But for other people like me, it'll open up this breadth, which oodles of stuff can open up to you.
Yeah. So I'm interested in maybe what I'm hearing again in my language rather than your language. So feel free to disagree. But maybe I'm thinking that there's a golden thread, and the golden thread is holistic care in general practice. That's always been the foundation.
Absolutely.
Everything is underpinned by that holistic care, and there's a golden thread, which is that holistic care, taking the people as a whole, and then there's some skills that you're really good at, but that's golden thread is there's all of these bits of career that have evolved. So, and I know that was my language of reinventing versus evolution. But yes, I can see how maybe it's and actually evolution's probably easier if you're thinking of planning careers, because
definitely revolution's scary.
Yes, yeah. Evolution sounds like a better concept, doesn't it? I do this, and then I do this, and then I do that, and this opens the door, and it leads.
What's awesome, and what I say to people who are in their career path, is that each of these stages you get through opens a huge range of new doors. You may not realize the doors are open, but if you just raise your eyes from the day-to-day work, you'll see there are open doors around. So getting through medical school and qualifying as a doctor, the doors that open are enormous. Actually, CCT is another huge door. Until you've got CCT out of the way, there's a lot of doors that won't open to you. And I think we can get caught up in doing pre-CCT stuff to get this extra qualification or get that experience. And actually far more doors open up post-CCT. And I think and I think some of the best advice I ever had was get your exams out of the way. For me, for general practice and academic general practice, you don't do PhDs, or which you never did pre-CCT. But it was just crack on and get that out of the way, Helen. And it was such good advice because other doors did open for me. I learned a heck of a lot from the experience as well. So yeah, back to you.
Yeah. Maybe if I'll bring us to a close, and perhaps if I ask you to summarize, and maybe what would be your top tips for doctors at work?
So many things about this one. So things that I've learned is about choosing your battles wisely. You can't fight every battle. So I'm an activist, but actually I can't fight every battle. So work out where the power lies. And so if you're going to fight a battle, who's got the power, and work out how to play the game their way. So I've certainly learned to play by the rules. So that's what I call playing nicely. Treat everyone with respect and dignity, because you never know when you're going to be coming across these people again. Learn the rules that others work by and play by their rules where you can. You can only change yourself. You can't change other people reliably. I think we spend a lot of time trying to change other people, and actually in this world, the only person we can reliably change or modify is ourselves. So I've talked a few times about modifying myself for the situations, whether that's learning to fit with some very stuffy board rules and regulations to get stuff done, so be it. whether it's dialing down my energy levels, so be it. And when you're in a conflict situation, if I assume the other person is unable to change, the question is, do I want this conflict to be over? So what can I do to change it? And that shifting is quite a big paradigm shift. And the final thing is, when you go through life, for me, I'm a soft bellied creature. I've had to develop a suit of armor over the years. I think of myself as, I say I'm an armadillo because everyone knows what an armadillo looks like, but the correct analogy is a pangolin, which has scales of armor on its back. And I've had to develop scales of armor to get through doing some difficult stuff over the years. And I still gain new scales of armor all the time when I'm asked to do something difficult or hard. But I want to take that suit of armor off one day. I want to retain the soft underbelly. So it's being authentic and true to myself so that I can take the armor off one day.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Helen.